Hey guys, today I'm going to be making a bed. I'm going to be making the bed out of walnut, mostly, and I have a couple pieces of maple that I'll use for some accent pieces. It's going to be made in a mid-century modern style, and it's going to be a king-size bed. So here I have all my stock lumber. I'm just marking it in general lines, not actual final length pieces. And I'll just cut it and mill it. I use the jointer to square it on one side, and then after I'm done with that, I'll run it through the planer. And this is generally a pretty long process. It takes me usually a couple days to mill all this stuff down. So in here I just kind of made a template on the concrete for this is just half of the headboard. It'll be in a chevron pattern. So I'm just marking here for some dowels. Here I'll use a dowel jig to self-centering dowel jig to pre-drill my holes so that I can place all my dowels in there. And then for the glue up, usually I'll do it all in one piece, but this was kind of an odd size and hard to handle, so I did it in two glue ups. I glued it in sections and then glued the two sections together. So here you can see I'm doing my first section. And then here I'm gluing the sections together to make the whole piece. And then here's the next day. I'm going to start cleaning this up, getting it ready to trim and glue together. Off camera I actually made a second one of these identical. And you'll see in a minute I'll glue the two pieces together to make the chevron pattern. So here's a new day, and I'm just laying my pieces out, and I'm trying to decide which side should be up and which side should be down. Got a pretty significant warp in the board, but it's not too bad. I'll fix that just with some dowels and some clamps. It's about here I realized that my edges weren't exactly straight, so I had to pull out the jointer and run them across to flatten them. There it is, all glued up. So here I'm just going to take a break from the headboard and work on the runner pieces. I had both sides of these were not milled, so it's a little bit long for my jointer. So what I had to do is use that piece of MDF as a straight edge on the table saw, run it through once on that side to square one end, and then I could flip it over and square off both ends. So here I've got those pieces of maple, and I'm just going to glue them together to the walnut for my trim pieces on the headboard. And you'll see in a minute where I glued these up. So that's the one piece, and now I'm doing the second piece. Didn't have enough small clamps to do 2 at the same time, so I just did it in 2 pieces. And there's that all glued up. Well, mostly glued up. Now here I'm just taking the hand plane and taking down some of the high spots on there. Actually spent probably a solid 2 hours hand planing this, and then maybe another hour sanding it. So here I had some imperfections in the wood, like some knots and whatever. So I'm just going to fill it with some resin. Use the torch to get the bubbles out. There's the next day. Some of the resin had settled, so I had to go back and put a second layer. It was about right here I started to freak out because one of the sections where I had poured resin had seeped through to the underside and actually made my top stuck to the workbench. I only pulled a little bit of the top up with it. So here I'm moving back to the runners, and I'm trying something I had never done before, which was mortise and tenon. It didn't work out as well as I hoped it would, but it did come out okay. Then I'm just cutting some relief cuts for some wedges. So in here I'm actually going to start routing out the tenon, or excuse me, the mortises rather. And this is a fairly new jig that I had made for my router, and I was actually pretty impressed with it. It worked out really well. And then I just come back and clean those rounded corners up. Here I'm just doing a dry assembly to make sure everything goes together okay. You can see my shop assistant there. He's cute at least. Just checking for square there. And now I'm just going to sand these runners down. I started with 80 grit and I worked all the way up to 320. And now it's going to final glue up. And then a few hours later I came back and took it out of the clamps and started to clean up the edges. So here I cut these smooth with a flush cut saw. And then I come back later and actually clean these up with a sander. So now I'm going to work on the legs. They're just small legs, little 6-inch legs, but I wanted a taper on them to kind of fit the mid-century modern. And I don't exactly have a tapering jig, but I saw a little tutorial on how to just make a quick jig out of some scrap plywood pieces, and it actually worked out pretty good. It's a lot easier than I thought it would. I think a lot of times I build these things up in my head to be more complicated than they are. And then here I just took a little hand plane and put a small chamfer on them. And then finally, me and my wife, we put a coat of poly on. You can see I'm just finishing up attaching the legs. So this step is kind of unnecessary, seeing it's a bed, but it's just a little extra step that I wanted to take. I wet it all down to raise the grain on it, and then I came back and sanded it with a 320 grit. And then here I'm just putting a final coat of poly. I ended up putting 3 coats of wipe-on poly on the whole thing, the bed and the frame, or the headboard and the frame. And then here it is, we're actually installing it in the room. I cut these little braces to attach to the frame so that I could be able to attach the headboard and take it off. And there it is, my mid-century modern bed. In case you're wondering, I did add lights to it. We don't have bedside lamps, so just to add a little bit of light, I put some lights around the headboard and the inside of the frame. It was a great project. I definitely learned a whole heck of a lot. So, yeah, thanks for watching, guys.